when anybody talks about the abortions and the taking of these innocent children every day. Last week there was a high school football team and its cheerleaders, and they came under fire. The players and the cheerleaders were all in agreement that they wanted their team to enter the field bursting through a large paper banner with an inspirational Bible verse on it. And that Bible verse was Philippians 4:13. It wasn't a school-sanctioned event. Nobody had any problems with it, but guess who did? The ACLU. The ACLU has been used as Satan's tools for many years, tearing apart God's woven fabric of our society. No program, no Republican, no Democrat, no church is going to change our country. The only thing that's going to change our country is the fire of Almighty God. My heart's so burdened with this generation today and where we live. These are just a few quotes that I've heard from youth over the years. My parents hate me. What do you think that does to a kid's self-esteem? My dad wanted to abort me. My mom says she hates me. She's given me away to foster care. My mom's live-in boyfriend smokes pot. My dad beats me. Now my heart really breaks for our youth. You know, suicide is the second biggest killer of teens today. 58% of our teens, I can't say our teens, I should say high school students, are sometimes during the 4 years in high school, they're drug users. 72% of our high school students abuse alcohol. We're living in a losing generation. The statistics are that 65% of church kids are involved in these percentages I just gave you. We are a broken, hurting, dying world. But we as a church are here to offer help. We must share no expense in reaching out to the 70% of unchurched kids in our schools. But I tell you what, no sermon, no youth pastor, no band, no song, no witnessing track. It takes the purity of heart and the brilliancy of intellect to make one great for God. And again, we just need this fire from our Almighty God. But you ask for the fire. When you ask for fire, you're not asking for a magic show. What you're asking for is the manifestation of God Himself. There are some misconceptions about fire. For one, have you ever taken a candle to a curtain? Okay, when you take a candle to a curtain and you hold it underneath that curtain, what happens? That curtain just gets totally engulfed in flames. And, you know, that's what we need to be. You know, we need to look at that as like an individual's heart. If an individual's heart had the fire of God in it, that heart would be totally consumed by God's presence. When David killed Goliath, he did it because he went against him with suitable ammunition. That ammunition being a stone. So David picked up a stone that was big enough to slew the giant. Some would have tried to kill the giant with a sand and a straw. But what would have happened? The giant wouldn't have fallen. The giant wouldn't have dropped. So what David did is he didn't waste any time skirmishing with sand and straws. He just picked up that rock and he took it and he put enough muscle behind that rock to where he hit that giant in the head and knocked him out. First throw out of the box, cracked that giant's beam. But there wouldn't have been no, if David would have just clipped that giant, just winged him a little bit, there wouldn't have been any mourning in that Philistine camp that night. There would have been no definite result expected out of anything in common, because what will happen? Elijah trusted God to take care of his consequences just like David did. Next thing we want to learn about Elijah, is that he knew God well enough to trust him. Some of us are so slightly acquainted with the Lord that we are afraid to do this. Many of us get little help from God because we are afraid to trust Him to do very much for us. We won't trust Him any further than we have to. You know, this is something that I think we can all kind kind of come together on this point right here. Because have you ever just been in prayer, you got something going on in your life, something really big, and you just like turn it over to the Lord and say, Lord, I just want to lay this before your cross today, before your feet, before your throne, however you want to say it. And then a couple days later, you're just like, well, it's not working fast enough, Lord. I want to pull this back. I want to try to do this in my own strength. But it just never seems to work that way. You know, you won't get any further, you know, with the Lord by taking it away. You just need to take things and just lay it right in the Lord's lap and just let him take care of it. In 1 Kings, we see the fire of the fall of God, the fire of God fall. Elijah's the prophet, and God challenges the prophets of Baal to a contest. Believing that Baal was God, they rode around in lightning and fire. You kind of heard there on that description in that drama there of all the kind of the chaos and confusion that was going around in the background. I can imagine what it was like with the prophets of Baal running around, screaming and yelling and cutting themselves with knives. I'm sure Elijah and the real prophets of Israel were probably standing there just shaking their heads going, wow, look at these guys. But they need to call out the day that Baal manifests himself, or the day that Baal never manifested himself. As Elijah steps up to bat, he doesn't take all day. He calls out to God, and God shows up. What I want to point out this morning is 4 things that happened when the fire fell. And I would like to invite you to ask the fire of God to fall into your life. The people fell in his presence. In verse 39, when all the people saw that they fell prostrate, here it seems like the Israelites voluntarily fell in God's presence because God flashed fire from heaven for Elijah, and that he will help us accomplish what he commands us to do. The proof may not be as dramatic in our lives as it was in Elijah's, but God makes resources available in creative ways to accomplish his purpose. He will give us the wisdom to raise a family, the courage to take the stand for truth, or the means to provide for someone in need. Like Elijah, he can have the faith of whatever God commands to do, he will provide what we need to carry it through. Now, I got a letter in the mail this last week, and first I looked at it, and I thought it was an advertisement. I was just like, man, this just needs to be filed. But for some reason, I pulled it back, and I looked at it again. And this letter came from, the National Bone Marrow Donation Center. And it just floored me when I opened this letter. And I'm a perfect match to somebody to donate my bone marrow to them to help them with their cancer. And I'm just like totally floored. And this thing it's going to move fast. So if you could keep me in prayer this week, because I'm probably going to have to be going down to St. Mary's, excuse me, and I'm probably going to have to do some testing on me and stuff like that to make sure I'm a suitable donor for this. And it just floored me because just like, God uses us in so many different ways. And whoever thought that this would be a way that he uses me, not just with the bone marrow, but being able to maybe talk to the family about the Lord. You just don't know the situation. But the Lord's got it all planned out. If I'm the man or not, we'll see. But if you could keep me in your prayers for that, I'd really appreciate it. But there was a recognition who God was. You can have a small box, you can put God in it, or you can have a big box, and you can put God in it. But the thing is anytime you put God in a box, God is small. The Israelites had lost sight of who God was. They were not strangers to God's work. The Lord appeared to them in Egypt at the Red Sea, the pillars of fire coming down, the manna. that came into the desert and water from the rock. You know, the Israelites, they all seen this. They were, you know, they knew what God could do. In spite of all that God had done for them, they had lost sight of who he was. God had become very small. An ungodly king, Ahab, was a spirit of independence. And no new God had worship or divided. No new God was to come and worship and divide God's people. And they had lost sight of who God was. Everything Elijah did was sensational. That's why he aroused the country. They're shutting off the water supply from heavens for 3 years. And there wasn't a drop of rain or dew. Can you imagine if the water supply to Rifle was shut off for 3 years? I mean, what would you do? I mean, you have people down there at Rifle Creek with buckets, and down at the Colorado River with buckets and bringing stuff home and boiling it. And, you know, it would be a pretty tough deal. But you know, the thing is too, is the crops weren't growing. So there was a great famine in the area. It was in verse 2. It spoke of the great famine. But you know, the thing was, is the biggest stir about this was they were living in such an idolatrous, corrupt, godless, and blasphemous country that anybody had ever seen or recorded. And it made Ahab and Jezebel mad enough to spit fire. If you wish to see a dead church awakened, you can do something out of the ordinary. There's plenty of Bible authority for not pushing anything aside just because it seems sensational. Point number 2. People today have lost sight of who God is. This situation would have been hard, but when Noah built the ark and he loaded it with strange cargo, that situation was hard. And the temptation was too strong. In C.S. Lewis' classic, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, we have a prime example of a young man named Edmund who lusts for Turkish delights and leads him into allegiance to the White Witch, betraying those who he loved. Just like Edmund,